Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Hoops. I'm one of the co-hosts of The Rebuild, joined with our other host, Gary Winslet. Today, we have a very special repeat guest with us, Representative Josh Harder. He is a Democratic congressman representing California's 9th District. He was first elected in 2018, flipping a Republican-held seat. And in May 2025, recently, Harder launched the bipartisan Build America Caucus, which focuses on reducing regulatory barriers to accelerate housing, energy, infrastructure development, and he serves as its chair. Harder has been active in pushing for federal housing reform, including the bipartisan Road to Housing Act, a major housing package that has currently been under consideration with a lot of debates around provisions like Section 901. That is going to be the ongoing theme of this conversation, and we'll just dive right in. Representative Harder, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. So for listeners who haven't tracked every single twist and turn of this bill, there's been many, would you like to give us the quick spiel of what the now amended 21st Century Road to Housing Act actually does and why we're calling it the most significant federal housing bills in decades?
This bill, it's a little bit of a, Franken bill that combines about 27 other bills into one whole. But I really break it down into a couple different categories. First, this creates incentives for cities and counties, local leaders across the country to build more housing. If they build more, they're going to get more money from the federal government in this bill. It also repeals a lot of red tape that's in things like the HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Building Code. The big thing there is the repeal of the chassis rule, which is preventing us from building manufactured housing. As you and your listeners probably know, we've had very little, if at all, any construction productivity growth for many, many decades. So this repeal is a chance to actually lower housing costs by building more homes in factories. A really exciting move in the right direction. And then third, it also expands things like categorical exemptions from federal permit review so we can actually build housing faster. This is the same sort of thing that you've seen in states like California and other states that have passed, real pro-housing legislation over the last couple of years, but sort of the federal complement to that. So it does a lot of great things, and that's one of the reasons we've been pushing for it for the last couple of months. We're hoping we can fix a couple of the last provisions and hopefully get this across the finish line for good.
Yeah, I mean, but before some of these provisions that we're going to talk about got added, this was something to be really excited about. This
Absolutely.
was something I was thrilled to see. The first iteration that went through the House, I was just amazed at how good of a bill this was.
That's right. Yeah. And I think this is our first chance to pass a federal housing bill in 50 years. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really an exciting moment. Unfortunately, it's turned bittersweet, but I think that shouldn't cause us to lose hope. I mean, we've come to this because of such a huge grassroots mobilization across the country to finally bring up housing as a federal issue. There's been so much growth at a state and local level over the last decade or 2 decades. This is the first time we really have a moment at the federal level. And there are so many good ideas in this bill that are going to do a ton of good. I can keep talking about it in little pieces of bills here, but one thing that I'm really excited about is this helps get more zoning practices for cities that actually want to grow. We're very consumed sometimes with cities that don't want to do anything, but there's a whole section of cities out there that really want to build more housing. They just don't know how. And so this bill is going to have a lot of support to make sure that those sorts of folks can actually pass pro-growth measures to hopefully accelerate more housing construction in those areas. So, yeah, you're right. There's a whole lot of good things in here, and I think it's the result of years of hard work.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk about how it fits into sort of your broader political trajectory. You launched the Build America Caucus last year to cut red tape, get sort of federal housing, energy, infrastructure projects actually built. Where does road fit into that broader project?
This is our top priority, this Congress. This is the reason we created this caucus, because there really was not a hub for this type of work. This work spans a lot of different congressional committees. And so we wanted something that would be a little bit more collaborative and frankly, there's also a lot of folks who weren't on the main committee that manages housing, the Financial Services Committee in the House, that wanted to be involved in this work. And so we knew it was going to be bipartisan. We knew it was going to get a lot of momentum. And so that's why we created this in the first place. The second big effort we're also working on in conjunction with this housing bill is an effort to try to get an energy permitting bill across the finish line to make it easier to build energy, lower costs, which I think is especially important when we're seeing demand growth and artificial intelligence data center construction across the country. So that's our second priority. But, this is really the reason we constructed this caucus in the first place.
It would be really great to see. It was so disappointing when we didn't get EPRA across the line in the last Congress, and so it would be really great to see its successor be really good and do well.
There's some real momentum. I think there are ongoing negotiations. Ultimately, we need a lot of trust. This administration has unfortunately created a bit of a political vendetta against clean energy projects. They've canceled solar projects that were days away from construction and actually offering power to homes. And so I think one real precondition for getting an energy permit bill across the line is going to be some type of guarantee that this administration is going to actually support all of the above energy, not just fossil fuels, which they clearly love, but nuclear, solar, wind, geothermal. If we can get that type of commitment, I think, frankly, the policy here is pretty understood and broad bipartisan agreement behind it. Really, the limiting factor at this moment is the trust to actually get a deal.
Trust seems to be a major key when it comes to any energy infrastructure projects. Before we go off at a major tangent here, it is just so politically salient right now when you are going outside in your car and you see like gas prices being screamed at with you at the end of the month when you're getting utility bills. So knowing that remains a major priority for your caucus is always reassuring for us to hear. But to shift gears a little bit and get back into the nitty gritty, could you walk us through what Section 901, which just sounds very wonky as it is, what it is and how it kind of got snuck in there and why we might have some faults with it?
So there's been a lot of concern over the last couple of years about institutional investment in single family homes. And so think about this as, Blackstone or BlackRock. Sometimes people get a little bit confused in the memes online, but, buying all the homes across the country. And that's the reason why housing prices are so high. I think most of the policy wonks that look at this issue will tell you is that that's not entirely true. Institutional owners have less than 1% of the single family housing stock across the country. But in some areas, that can be a lot higher. In Metro Atlanta, for instance, more than 30% of single family homes are owned by institutional investors. And so certainly it is a concern that there's been bipartisan agreement on. Trump has talked about this in his State of the Union, and he's tweeted a lot about it as well. He said that this is something we really need to fix. We need to get large hedge funds, private equity firms out of the housing business. And that's gotten a lot of support from the left wing of the Democratic Party as well. That's always, of course, skeptical about corporate ownership. There are real concerns there, and that's why ultimately in this bill, there was sort of an 11th hour change to put in a provision that would put some real limits on institutional ownership in the housing market. I think it was well-intentioned. Unfortunately, because it was drafted at the last minute and it didn't really have time to be heavily vetted, it has some real unintended consequences. It's called Section 901. That's the section in the bill. And effectively, it's going to halt the production of a part of the housing industry called the build to rent category, which is building right now 72,000 new rental units per year, especially in areas of the Sun Belt like Arizona, where these are just going up like wildfire. So this provision is going to push out renters. It's going to destabilize housing through mandatory divestment timelines that are going to compel these owners to sell their property and ultimately displace the renters who live there right now. The way I think about this and explain it to folks is it's like trying to solve a food shortage by banning supermarkets. Essentially, you are punishing the folks that are building the housing that's actually going to address the crisis that we're seeing all across the country.
Yeah, I mean, so my mom actually lives in one of these rented build to rent houses. She's got a family member of mine who's got mental illness challenges. Like they need a house.
Yeah.
But they don't have the money to like own one. So they rent one of these build to rent. But if like the company that manages that is forced to sell it because there's supposedly some evil landlord, like she's got to move. And I don't think that that's like the intention that people have when they think about institutional investors. As you noted, it's less than 1% of the single family homes. How did this become such a thing people focus on?
Everybody looks for a villain in politics. And when you're frustrated by the state of affairs, you want to find somebody to blame. And so it's no surprise that when we've seen housing prices grow more than double the price of inflation over the last couple of decades, and when most young people can't afford a house, there's going to be a lot of anger out there. And so somebody's going to take advantage of that and try to divert that anger onto somebody. And so especially at a time when people are really skeptical of Wall Street, and understandably so, there's going to be a lot of blame that's thrown on private equity. I think there's a lot of damage that private equity often does. You see consolidation in markets like healthcare, where it really is a problem to have so much consolidation. But transferring that to the housing market, which is a very different situation, where there's so much capital out there, but ultimately most of the homes are owned by the people who live there, or by very landlords that own just a couple of properties. I think ultimately the situation here is just people are really frustrated, and they want to have somebody else on the other side who has been responsible for creating all of these problems. Because if it was that easy, we could just fix it. We could just, ban institutional investment, and all of a sudden tomorrow, housing prices would become affordable all across the country. Of course, we know that's not what's going to happen. It's because we haven't built enough housing. And so if we need to build millions of new units, then, that's what we need to be focused on. The analogy here is, if you actually look at the filings of some of these companies, if you look at Blackstone's filings, they will talk about one of the biggest risks to their housing portfolio is the risk that we might actually build more homes. Because if we would do that, it would actually lower the value of their investment. So I tell folks, if you're really frustrated about corporate ownership, the best way to stick it to them is actually deal with the supply issues and try to build the homes that we can all live in.
That's exactly right. Like when we build more supply, you have a lot more power that's on the side of the buyers and the renters rather than the landlords, because now it's the landlords who are having to compete to find somebody to live in the house, not the renters trying to compete with each other over a very limited stock.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see this time and time again. Abuses by landlords go down when we build more homes. It's just totally obvious. When you have an alternative, when you move across the street, if you don't like the person that's managing your home, then you have those options. And so I think that's totally right. The best way to give power to the people is to build the homes for them to live.
And it's funny that this has such strong bipartisan appeal, and why Trump has been very vocal in his Truth Social post about it is because he's aware that people are very upset with the economy, as much as he will go on TV and say otherwise. But it's clear that rather than just changing some of his policies, like, for example, like tariffs on construction material, that's not going to help. Deporting our entire construction workforce, that's not going to help. Like, doing things like that are going to be actual tangible efforts to lower the price of housing. But he doesn't want to do that because those are his favorite pet policies. So now he can jump in on this because his team will tell him it's going to poll well, it's salient to the voters. He could put a very tiny Band-Aid on this, and to him, he's fixed the problem. And he could point to that and said, like, I signed that, I got that across. And while we know that it won't make any meaningful effort, what is going to happen is by the time people start to notice, he may be out of office and we're still stuck with the issue that has grown even harder. But I wanted to get back to the specifics of the bill. Obviously, like, as we mentioned, it kind of like snuck in at the very last minute, to the point I think even Senator Schatz at one point said it was like a miswrite or a mistake. But clearly it was not. It's something that's been doubled down on. Where do you think the current language overshoots itself? Would it be just the investor ban in general, or the fact that the text also catches net new build to rent or renovate to rent housing?
I think that the two biggest problems are the large definition, the overly wide definition on what actually constitute an institutional ownership, and then the second problem being the divestiture timelines. It'd be a very different situation if you were saying there was a 30-year investment window for you to actually build a home, rent it out, and then maybe someday down the road you had to actually sell it to somebody, maybe the person who lived there right now. The 7-year window that exists, given how long it actually takes to build a home right now, to get all the permits, to do the construction, is just way too short and would functionally completely kill this market. And then, of course, as Gary said, you're just including, a lot of folks like the entire build-to-rent category that just don't belong here. This isn't what people have a problem with. This isn't, some Wall Street billionaire who is owning a home and then, doubling rents the next day. These are people that are actually building new homes. I think it's unbelievably ironic that a bill that is all about trying to build more homes could very well have the opposite impact, which I think would just be an absolute catastrophe. It would break my heart if we spent all this work trying to get something across the line and it actually had the unintended consequence that was the opposite of what we've all been working for. I think this is actually a very easy problem to solve if we want to solve it. The challenge is, I think that there's just so much desire from the White House and from folks in the Senate that are pretty wedded to an anti-corporate position, that it's going to be a little bit challenging getting folks to get to yes here. But we released up a letter yesterday that had 76 signatures of members of Congress. That is a big deal. Just to put that in context. That is the largest bipartisan push for any substantive policy, any substantive bill, this Congress for the last year and a half. That tells you a lot. And by the way, it was half Democrats, half Republicans, actually a few more Republicans than Democrats in the end. That tells you that there is a huge groundswell of feeling here that we can get this fix done while retaining the momentum and passing this bill.
You told the dispatch that you're worried about fumbling at the 5-yard line. If 901 stays in there as it's currently drafted, as you say, that's fumbling at the 5-yard line. What do you think the worst case scenario is if that actually comes to pass?
I think that the two worst case scenarios are passing this bill as is or not passing this bill at all. Neither of those are acceptable. And that's why we have to sort of, thread the needle here where we want to keep this momentum. The fact that we could pass the first housing bill in 50 years is a really important moment. And this 11th hour change that unfortunately has gotten a lot of bipartisan support has a real risk of pushing us in the wrong direction. But then the second big risk here is that we pass this bill as is, and the benefits of this bill turn out to be less than we're hoping. The chassis rule doesn't actually spur more manufactured housing. The incentives might not be enough money out there to actually cause cities to change their behavior. But the bans are pretty well defined. And so, unfortunately, one big consequence could be that this bill could stop more housing than it actually stimulates. And I think the reason that is such a big deal is because, 72,000 homes a year, you think that over a 10-year time frame, that's a lot of homes.
All of this is coming at the head while we're having conversations on the side and noticing that the data is showing us that we're facing a blue state and blue city exodus. And while it is an immediate problem because it shows that people are looking around to the places that they live in and the elected leaders that they believe in, that they just do not find it worthwhile to live there, it will also become an electoral problem if we lose that, which is going to make races that much harder to win. So I think we have to come to a whole stop as a Democratic Party and look within ourselves and understand, people are leaving for a reason. If you look under the hood, you do see that housing is going to be the largest driver of it all. So it would be a logical next step to make it easier to build. And it gets to the point where it almost sounds like a little boring to keep saying the same thing over and over, like build, baby, build, but yet it keeps refraining from happening. And just circling back to the 7-year timeline you gave, that is incredibly so short in the period of getting to permits, getting to actual building, getting someone into a home. By the time that happens, it absolutely makes no sense to just build that home. There is a popular show right now called Euphoria, and the main subplot is like a lot of crime, drugs, crazy stuff. And then there's one subplot of one of the developers. He just became a developer. He took over his dad's business and he's trying to build in California. And every other scene is like, have you tried getting permits here? And I just find it so funny that it's worked its way into a very popular show. And like, no one has any clue how like important this is to me as a policy wonk. It is really hard to get permitting over to here. So what I asked you is like, we are in a midterm year and we do know that, not having Wall Street in homes polls well. How do we make this message more politically like feasible to the average voter who's not going to spend as much time on this?
Yeah, I think you're totally right there on the exodus from blue states. I saw just last week that California is going to lose 1 million school-age children, which is going to be a huge challenge to our public school system. And, we're just seeing a shrinking in blue states because people can't afford to live there. It's not that they don't want to. I talk to folks all the time whose kids are moving out of state because they just can't find a home to buy. But I actually think the two bigger reasons that are even more important here, one is just the economic opportunity that is limited when you can actually buy homes. I think the best way to see this with the AI boom in the Bay Area now, so many folks are concerned about what AI is going to do to jobs. This is clearly a very productive moment where there are a lot of millionaires and billionaires being minted in San Francisco. Every other time we've had a virtual gold rush like that, we've seen a huge flood of folks from across the country going into that area to make sure that economic opportunity is shared by all. That was quite literally the gold rush. That's how my family got to California. My great-great-grandfather got on a wagon train in 1850, and I think if it was $1 million to buy a home in California, he probably would not have, pushed that wagon train all the way into the state. And so, the fact that we're not able to build housing essentially means that we're not going to make sure that the economic opportunity created by any of these superstar cities is actually shared by enough people. And then the second issue that I really, really care about is just the enormous amount of cynicism and apathy about our political process and life itself when you can't actually afford to buy a home. People are really angry out there. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why we have to fight back some of the provisions that might actually not make people happier, like banning build to rent housing. But that cynicism is so potent because people don't believe that they're actually going to have a life better than their parents. And the most important reason for that is that they don't think they're ever going to own their own home. And so there are so many negative effects that come from this housing crisis. The most important thing, I think this is probably the most, if not one of the most important policy issues we have across the country. And we are right at the moment where we can actually get this solved. To your question of how do we do it, I think we have to be able to work on people's minds instead of their hearts. At their hearts, everybody gets this. But the analytical part of our brain sometimes shuts down when we think about housing. And so we have to be able to persuade people that on this issue where everybody wants to make it more affordable to own a home, the best way to do it is actually not by banning some of the folks that are doing that right now. I think it feels like it should be more intuitive than it is, but unfortunately that's clearly not the case. I think if we can actually show folks that what they're trying to do would do the opposite, we can hopefully get a little bit more momentum.
Yeah. I mean, on sort of, working with where people are, I've found the analogy that works for me the best is asking people, what do you think would happen to the price of used cars if you banned new cars?
Totally.
Right? Any used car that was still in really good working condition, now that's what rich people are going to want to buy up, but that's just going to jack up the prices of all the used cars underneath them. I really think that you've got to be able to break it down in those kinds of ways that people get.
Yeah, absolutely. And, That's a great analogy. I think you're totally right. I think it's odd that people understand supply and demand in so many different ways, but when it comes to housing, there's often a little bit of a blind spot. And I think that blind spot is just people don't believe it's going to happen. They've seen the costs, they see the costs, but they're very skeptical that the benefits are ever going to be shared. I think the only antidote to that skepticism is reality itself. When people visit a city like Austin, where rents have fallen, they start to say, "Hey, it is possible to live in a city that a lot of people want to live in and not pay through the nose, although it's still pretty expensive there." I think if we can get from the unfortunate loop that we're in right now back to a virtuous cycle where people actually see the housing being built, they see housing prices falling. My hope is that virtual cycle can be sustained, but we have to force ourselves back onto it first.
Yeah, I think once people start to actually see results, I agree with you, is when the tides will change. I think a lot of people are just acting from a place of like scarcity and like financial nihilism. People don't believe it can get any better, so they don't want anyone to get let in because right now they already feel like it's not even enough for them. And it's why J.D. Vance has been so popular to put the narrative that it's just like it's an immigration issue. It's not that we don't have housing, we just have too many people in here. But to me, I find that to be like anti-liberalism within itself, to instead say, no, we're closed, we can't welcome you anymore. And that's why we have the housing crisis that we have now. It just is mind-boggling to me because a wealthy country would instead look to be like, let's build more so that we can welcome more people in and have a better future for all. To me, I feel like that is the most American ideal you could have.
I mean, not only is it nihilistic, go to any housing construction site and you're going to see immigrants. I mean, those are the folks who are literally building our housing. So, not only is it anti-liberal, if you are super anti-immigrant and conservative, you still should make sure that we have more immigration to actually build the homes that people live in. Because let me tell you, if you walk around the construction sites I see, you're going to hear a lot of Spanish.
Well, I think that is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Representative Harder, for being on here, for doing the work that you were doing. I did not know that was the largest bipartisan signage that you had on that letter. So just to see what an incredible feat is happening behind the scenes here, for us, it's very encouraging to see and hear, and I'm sure for the readers and the watchers as well. So thank you again.
No, thank you for the work you're doing. Now let's go out and get it done.
Thanks.
Exactly.